The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Officer Mike Donovan tightened the handcuffs around Marcus Wilson's wrists. The metal clicked into place with a sound that echoed through the quiet suburban street. It was just past 8 p.m. on a Friday night in Oak Ridge, a normally peaceful neighborhood where residents were either settling in for the evening or heading out to start their weekend. "I'm telling you, officer, you're making a mistake," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the situation. At 45, he'd learned that raising his voice or showing any sign of aggression would only make things worse. He kept his back straight, his shoulders relaxed, and his eyes focused straight ahead. Officer Donovan scoffed, the kind of dismissive sound that suggested he'd heard it all before. "Yeah, that's what they all say," he muttered, patting down Marcus's sides with more force than necessary. His partner, Officer Reed, a rookie who'd been on the force for less than 6 months, stood a few feet away, his hand resting nervously on his holster. The call had come in 20 minutes earlier. A suspicious person in a hoodie lurking around houses in the upscale neighborhood. The description had been vague at best, male, dark clothes, possibly armed. But when they spotted Marcus walking down the sidewalk in a black hoodie and jeans, that was enough for Donovan. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Donovan demanded, spinning Marcus around to face him. The streetlights cast harsh shadows across both their faces, creating a dramatic contrast between light and dark. Marcus took a deep breath before answering. "I live here, officer. 1842 Maple Street. It's just around the corner." Donovan exchanged glances with Reed. "Sure you do," he said, not bothering to hide his disbelief. "And I'm the mayor. Why don't you tell us what you're really doing here?" A small crowd had begun to gather. A few neighbors had stepped out onto their porches, drawn by the flashing lights of the police cruiser. Some had their phones out, recording the interaction from a safe distance. Marcus noticed them but kept his focus on the officers in front of him. "My ID is in my wallet back pocket," Marcus said evenly. "If you check it, you'll see my address." Donovan reached into Marcus's pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. He flipped it open, expecting to find confirmation of his suspicions. Instead, his expression shifted as he stared at the driver's license. For a moment, he said nothing, just looked from the ID to Marcus and back again. "Something wrong, Donovan?" Reed asked, stepping closer. Donovan handed him the ID without a word. Reed's eyes widened as he read the name and address. "Marcus Wilson, 1842 Maple Street," he read aloud, his voice trailing off. "Like I said," Marcus replied, maintaining his composure. "I live here. Now, would you mind removing these handcuffs? They're starting to hurt." But something else had caught Donovan's attention, another card that had fallen out of the wallet. He bent down to pick it up, and as he read it, his face drained of color. It wasn't just any card. It was a federal badge. "You're with the FBI?" Donovan's voice had lost its edge, replaced by something closer to disbelief. Marcus nodded once. "Special Agent Marcus Wilson, Counterterrorism Division. I was transferred to the field office here 3 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Donovan's hand hovered over the handcuffs, momentarily frozen by the revelation. Reed took a small step back, his hand dropping away from his holster as the reality of the situation sank in. "I think we've had a misunderstanding, sir," Reed finally said, his voice wavering slightly. Marcus looked at him directly. "I believe we have, Officer Reed. Now, the handcuffs, please." Donovan snapped out of his stupor and quickly moved to unlock the restraints. As the metal fell away, Marcus rotated his wrists, wincing slightly at the red marks left behind. He could feel the eyes of the neighbors on him, could hear the murmurs spreading through the small crowd. "Look, Agent Wilson, we were responding to a call about a suspicious person," Donovan began, his tone defensive despite the apology in his words. "You match the description." "A black man in a hoodie," Marcus interrupted, finally allowing a hint of his frustration to show. "That's not a description, Officer Donovan. That's a stereotype." Donovan's jaw tightened. "We were just doing our job." "So was I," Marcus replied. "Walking home after a long day at work shouldn't be cause for suspicion. It shouldn't result in me being handcuffed on my own street, in front of my own neighbors." The growing crowd had fallen silent, hanging on every word of the exchange. Some had lowered their phones, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of shame. But one woman continued to record, her expression resolute. Marcus recognized her as Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down. She gave him a small nod, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed. "We'll need to file a report about this incident," Reed said, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Would you be willing to—" "Oh, I'll be filing a report, all right," Marcus cut in, his voice level but firm. "But it won't be with your department. It'll be with your superiors." Donovan's face flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. "Now hold on, Agent Wilson. There's no need to escalate this. Like I said, it was a misunderstanding." Marcus straightened his hoodie, took his wallet from Reed's outstretched hand, and tucked it back into his pocket. "A misunderstanding with consequences, Officer Donovan. If I weren't who I am, if I were just an ordinary citizen, how would this have played out? Would you have listened when I told you I lived here? Would you have checked my ID before putting me in handcuffs? Or would I be in the back of your cruiser right now, another statistic?" The questions hung in the air, unanswered, because they didn't need to be. Everyone present knew the truth. Marcus turned to leave, but paused after a few steps. Without looking back, he added, "I expect you both at my house in 20 minutes. We have some things to discuss that I'd rather not address here on the street." With that, he walked away, leaving the officers standing awkwardly under the harsh glare of both the streetlights and public scrutiny. The crowd began to disperse, some shooting disapproving glances at the police, others hurrying back inside, likely to share what they'd witnessed with anyone who would listen. 20 minutes later, Officers Donovan and Reed stood on the porch of 1842 Maple Street, an impressive 2-story colonial with perfectly manicured hedges and a sleek black SUV in the driveway. Donovan rang the doorbell, adjusting his uniform nervously as they waited. The door opened to reveal Marcus, now dressed in a plain white t-shirt and jeans. The hoodie was gone, but the authority in his presence remained. "Come in," he said simply, stepping aside to let them enter. The interior of the house was tasteful, but understated. Hardwood floors, modern furniture, and walls adorned with framed photographs of what appeared to be family members. A bookshelf in the corner was filled with legal volumes and FBI training manuals. Marcus led them to the living room, gesturing for them to sit on the sofa while he took the armchair opposite. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied them with a calm intensity that made both officers shift uncomfortably. "Do you know why I asked you to come here?" he finally asked. Donovan cleared his throat. "To discuss the incident, I assume." Marcus nodded slowly. "Partly, but mostly I wanted you to see me. Really see me. Not as a suspicious figure in a hoodie, not as an FBI badge, but as a person, a homeowner in this neighborhood just like anyone else." He leaned forward slightly, hands clasped between his knees. "I've been in law enforcement for 23 years. I've worked cases across the country, put away terrorists, saved lives. And yet the moment I step outside in comfortable clothes after a long day, I'm just another suspect." Reed, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Sir, I want to apologize. You should have questioned your partner's assumptions," Marcus finished for him. "You should have asked to see my ID before the handcuffs went on. You should have remembered your training about reasonable suspicion versus probable cause." Reed nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Yes, sir." Donovan, however, wasn't as readily contrite. Look, Agent Wilson, I understand you're upset, but you have to see it from our perspective. We got a call about a suspicious person, Marcus cut in, and rather than investigating properly, you saw a black man in a hoodie and jumped to conclusions. Tell me, Officer Donovan, if I'd been white, would you have approached with your hand on your weapon? Would you have put the handcuffs on before confirming my identity? The question lingered in the air, unanswered because they all knew the truth. Donovan's silence was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus continued, his tone shifting from accusatory to instructive. Tomorrow I'll be calling your chief to discuss this incident. I won't be filing a formal complaint this time, but I will be requesting that both of you undergo additional training in implicit bias and proper procedure. He stood up, signaling that the conversation was coming to an end. And I'll be proposing a community outreach program where officers spend time getting to know the residents in their patrol areas, all the residents, not just the ones who look like they belong. Donovan stood too, his expression a mix of relief and lingering defensiveness. Is that all, Agent Wilson? Marcus looked at him for a long moment. No, it's not. I need you to understand something fundamental. The badge you wear doesn't give you the right to treat people with suspicion based on their appearance. It obligates you to protect everyone equally. He walked to the door and opened it. I became an FBI agent because I believe in justice. I still do. But justice requires more than enforcing laws. It requires treating people with dignity and respect. Remember that the next time you respond to a call about a suspicious person. As the officers left, Marcus stood in the doorway, watching them walk back to their cruiser. The night air had cooled, and somewhere down the street he could hear children laughing. This was his neighborhood, his home, and tomorrow he would begin the work of making sure it was safe for everyone, not just those who fit a certain description, because that's who Marcus Wilson really was. Not just an FBI agent, but a man determined to turn an injustice into an opportunity for change. And as the police cruiser pulled away from the curb, he already knew what his next steps would be. This incident wouldn't be buried or forgotten. It would be the catalyst for something important, something necessary. The real work was just beginning. By the time Marcus's alarm went off at 6 a.m. the next morning, the video of his encounter with Officers Donovan and Reed had already reached over 50,000 views online. Mrs. Chen had uploaded it to her social media accounts, and from there it had spread like wildfire. The comment section was flooded with a mix of outrage, support, and the inevitable trolls who insisted on missing the point entirely. Marcus hadn't watched it yet. He didn't need to. He'd lived it. Instead, he focused on his morning routine, a 5-mile run, a cold shower, and a protein-heavy breakfast. By 7:30, he was dressed in a tailored Navy suit, his FBI badge clipped to his belt, ready to set his plan in motion. His phone rang just as he was about to leave the house. The caller ID showed Director Harris. Marcus took a deep breath before answering. "Wilson," he said, his tone professional. "I've got the chief of police in Oak Ridge blowing up my phone this morning," Director Harris said without preamble. "Something about one of my agents being detained last night? Want to tell me what's going on?" Marcus moved to his living room window, looking out at the quiet street that had been anything but quiet the night before. "I was walking home after work, sir. 2 officers responded to a call about a suspicious person in the neighborhood. They handcuffed me before checking my ID." A heavy sigh came through the phone. "And now there's video." "Yes, sir." "This is going to be a PR nightmare," Harris muttered. "The Bureau doesn't need this kind of attention right now, Marcus." Marcus felt a flicker of irritation. "With all due respect, sir, I didn't ask to be handcuffed on my own street." There was a pause, then Harris's tone softened slightly. "No, you didn't. And that's exactly why we can't just let this slide. Have you spoken with Chief Grayson yet?" I'm heading to the station now. Good. Handle this your way, but keep me in the loop. And Marcus? Sir? This isn't just about you anymore. Use it. Make something good come from it. The line went dead, leaving Marcus standing there with a renewed sense of purpose. Director Harris was right. This wasn't just about one incident or one agent. It was about a pattern that needed to be broken. 30 minutes later, Marcus walked through the front doors of the Oak Ridge Police Department. The receptionist looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. Whether from the video or from his previous visits to the station in a professional capacity, he couldn't tell. I'm here to see Chief Grayson, Marcus said, showing his badge. Of course, Agent Wilson, he's expecting you. She picked up the phone, announced his arrival, then gestured toward the hallway. You know the way. Chief Robert Grayson was a 25-year veteran of the force with a reputation for being tough but fair. He rose from behind his desk as Marcus entered, extending his hand with a grim expression. Agent Wilson, I was hoping our next meeting would be under better circumstances. Marcus shook his hand firmly. So was I, Chief. Grayson gestured to a chair, and they both sat down. A folder lay open on the desk between them. Incident reports from the previous night, Marcus assumed. I've reviewed the body cam footage, Grayson began, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. And I've seen the video that's circulating online. I want you to know that I've already placed Officers Donovan and Reed on administrative duty pending a full investigation. Marcus nodded but said nothing, waiting for the chief to continue. Donovan has had issues before, Grayson admitted, his discomfort evident. Nothing this public, but there have been complaints about his conduct during stops, particularly with minorities. And yet he's still on the force, Marcus observed, his tone neutral but pointed. Grayson's jaw tightened. The complaints were never substantiated enough for dismissal. You know how these things go. I do, Marcus said. That's part of the problem, isn't it? The system protects its own. The chief leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus carefully. What exactly are you looking for here, Agent Wilson? An apology? Disciplinary action? You have to know that with your position, if you push for termination... I'm not looking to end careers, Marcus interrupted. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Marcus leaned forward, eyes locked with Grayson's. Change. Real, meaningful change. Not just in your department, but in how law enforcement interacts with communities of color across this country. Grayson's expression hardened. That's a tall order for one incident. This wasn't just one incident, Marcus replied, his voice steady. This was one incident that happened to be caught on camera, involving someone with enough authority to make people listen. How many others go unreported? How many citizens get handcuffed, searched, or worse because they fit a description or look suspicious? The chief didn't answer immediately. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where officers were arriving for the day shift. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. What are you proposing? Marcus had been preparing for this question since the handcuffs had first clicked around his wrists. A joint task force, he said, FBI and local law enforcement, focused on community relations and bias training. I want to use what happened to me as a case study, not to shame your officers, but to educate them. Grayson turned back to face him, eyebrows raised. You're serious about this? Dead serious, Marcus confirmed. I've already spoken with my director. The Bureau is on board, provided you are. And if I'm not? Marcus stood up, straightening his jacket. Then the video continues to circulate. The media picks up the story of an FBI agent racially profiled in his own neighborhood, and the pressure on your department becomes a lot more uncomfortable than a training program. They stared at each other for a long moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Finally, Grayson nodded. Set it up, but I want input on how it's structured. Of course, Marcus agreed. This isn't about pointing fingers, Chief. It's about making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else, someone who might not have a badge to protect them. As Marcus left the station, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The confrontation had gone better than expected, though he knew the real work was just beginning. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. Video at 200K views. Local news called. What should I tell them? Marcus typed back quickly. Tell them I'll be giving a statement tomorrow, and thank you. He was about to put his phone away when another text came through. This one from a number he didn't recognize. You're making a mistake. Not all cops are bad. Back off before you regret it. Marcus stared at the message, his jaw tightening. He saved the number but didn't respond. Threats were nothing new in his line of work, but this one felt different, more personal, more immediate. Someone was already pushing back against what he was trying to do. By the time Marcus arrived at the FBI field office, news of the incident had spread throughout the building. Colleagues stopped to offer support as he made his way to his desk. Some with genuine concern, others with the awkward discomfort of people who didn't quite know what to say. Wilson, a voice called out as he passed the break room. Got a minute? Special Agent Diana Rodriguez was leaning against the doorframe, coffee mug in hand. At 38, she had 10 years with the Bureau under her belt, and a reputation for being one of the sharpest minds in the office. She was also one of the few people Marcus considered a friend, rather than just a colleague. For you? Always, he replied, following her into the empty room. She closed the door behind them and fixed him with a penetrating look. I saw the video. You okay? I'm fine, he assured her. It's not the first time I've been profiled, Diana. Just the first time it went viral. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. As a Latina woman in federal law enforcement, she'd fought her own battles with prejudice and assumptions. What's your play here, she asked. Because I know you, Marcus. You're not letting this go. He smiled slightly at how well she could read him. I'm setting up a joint task force with the Oak Ridge PD. Bias training, community outreach, the works. Harris approved it this morning. Diana raised an eyebrow. And Grayson agreed to this? He didn't have much choice, Marcus admitted, but I think part of him knows it's necessary. She took a sip of her coffee, considering his words. You're going to need help. This isn't a one-person job. Are you volunteering? Someone has to keep you from going too hard at them, she said with a half-smile. These cops aren't terrorists, Marcus. They're people with flaws and biases, just like everyone else. People with flaws, biases, and guns, Marcus pointed out. The stakes are higher when those biases can get someone killed. Diana couldn't argue with that. So what's the first step? I'm giving a statement to the press tomorrow, he said. Setting the tone, making it clear this isn't about retribution but reform. After that, we start putting together the task force, selecting officers, developing the training program, establishing metrics for success. You've thought this through, she observed. I've had years to think about it, Marcus replied, his voice quieter now. This isn't new, Diana. What's new is the opportunity to do something about it. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. Count me in, whatever you need. As they walked back to their desks, Marcus's phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. We're watching you, Wilson. He showed it to Diana, whose expression darkened immediately. You need to report this. Already on it, he assured her, forwarding the messages to the cyber division. But I'm not backing down. If anything, this just proves how necessary this work is. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and preparations. By the time Marcus headed home, The video had reached 500,000 views and national news outlets were picking up the story. His phone was filled with messages from reporters seeking comments, old colleagues offering support, and even a few calls from civil rights organizations wanting to get involved. As he turned onto Maple Street, Marcus noticed something that made his stomach tighten. A police cruiser parked across from his house. For a moment, he thought it might be Donovan or Reed, but as he got closer, he recognized Officer Tamika Johnson behind the wheel. She stepped out as he approached. "Agent Wilson," she said with a nod, "Chief Grayson sent me to keep an eye on your place. Said you might be receiving some unwanted attention after what happened." Marcus studied her carefully, trying to determine if this was genuine protection or surveillance in disguise. "I appreciate the thought, Officer Johnson, but it's not necessary." She looked uncomfortable but stood her ground. "With all due respect, sir, we've already had reports of suspicious vehicles driving by your house today. The chief thought it would be prudent to have a presence here, at least for tonight." Marcus considered this. The threatening texts suggested the possibility of real danger, but he was also wary of Grayson's motives. "All right," he finally agreed. "But I'd like your badge number and the log of your shift for my records." Officer Johnson didn't seem offended by the request. If anything, there was understanding in her eyes as she handed him her card with the information. "For what it's worth, Agent Wilson, not everyone in the department is against what you're doing. Some of us have been waiting for something like this for a long time." As she returned to her cruiser, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Change wouldn't come easy. The threats in the patrol car outside his house were proof of that. But for every person resisting, there were others like Officer Johnson, ready for things to be different. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, at least, he could sleep knowing he'd taken the first steps toward making a difference. The handcuffs that had been meant to restrain him had instead unleashed something much more powerful. A determination to ensure they would never again be used to diminish someone's dignity without cause or consequence. The next morning dawned with an unusual amount of activity on Maple Street. News vans had set up across from Marcus's house, their satellite dishes extending skyward like mechanical flowers reaching for the sun. Reporters stood in clusters, sipping coffee and checking equipment while camera operators framed shots of the house where an FBI agent had been handcuffed for walking while black. Inside, Marcus was on his third cup of coffee, reviewing the statement he'd prepared for the press conference. The Bureau's public relations team had sent over their suggested talking points, but Marcus had politely set them aside. This wasn't going to be a sanitized, politically neutral statement designed to minimize blowback. This was going to be honest, even if that honesty made some people uncomfortable. His phone rang, Diana Rodriguez checking in. "How's the circus outside?" "Growing by the minute," Marcus replied, peeking through the blinds. "I count 4 different networks and at least a dozen reporters." "The statement's at 10, right? I'll be there. So will Director Harris and about half the field office." Marcus paused, surprised by the show of support. "Harris is coming?" "His idea," Diana confirmed. "Said it sends a message if the Bureau shows up in force." After they hung up, Marcus finished getting ready, his mind running through the various scenarios that might play out. He'd faced dangerous situations before, armed terrorists, hardened criminals, life or death decisions made in fractions of a second. But this, stepping in front of cameras to challenge a system he'd been part of for more than 2 decades, felt different, more consequential somehow. At precisely 9:45 a.m., Marcus stepped out of his front door. The reporters surged forward immediately, a barrage of questions flying at him from all directions. He raised a hand, silencing them with the practiced authority of a seasoned federal agent. "I'll be making a statement at 10 o'clock at the steps of City Hall," he announced. "I'd appreciate your questions after that." The drive to City Hall took only 15 minutes, but by the time Marcus arrived, the crowd had swelled considerably. In addition to the media, there were community members holding signs with messages like "Justice for All" and "End Police Profiling." There were also counter-protesters, smaller in number but vocal, with their own signs reading "Support our police" and "One incident isn't systemic." As Marcus approached the podium set up at the top of the steps, he spotted Diana and Director Harris standing off to one side, along with several colleagues from the field office. On the opposite side, Chief Grayson waited with a small contingent of officers, including, Marcus noted with interest, Officer Johnson. Conspicuously absent were Officers Donovan and Reed. The crowd quieted as Marcus adjusted the microphone. He took a breath, surveying the sea of faces before him, expectant, skeptical, hopeful, angry, and began to speak. "Good morning. My name is Marcus Wilson. I'm a special agent with the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, and 3 nights ago I was handcuffed outside my own home because someone thought I looked suspicious." A murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus continued, his voice steady and clear. "I could stand here and tell you about my credentials. I could list my commendations or the number of cases I've closed. I could tell you about my degrees or my years of service. But none of that should matter, because what happened to me wasn't about who I am. It was about what I looked like." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not here to vilify the Oak Ridge Police Department or the officers involved. What happened that night was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger problem that exists in departments across this country, a problem of perception, of implicit bias, of assumptions made based on skin color rather than behavior." Out of the corner of his eye, Marcus could see Chief Grayson shifting uncomfortably. But recognizing a problem is only the first step. The harder work is finding solutions. That's why I'm announcing today the formation of a joint task force between the FBI and the Oak Ridge Police Department focused on community relations and bias training. This task force will not only address the specific issues within this department, but will also develop a model that can be implemented nationwide. The crowd reacted with a mix of applause and skeptical murmurs. Marcus raised his hand again, calling for quiet. "I know there are those who think this is an overreaction to a single incident. To them I say, it's not about one night or one pair of handcuffs. It's about a pattern that repeats itself day after day in cities across America. It's about making sure that law enforcement serves and protects everyone equally, regardless of what they look like or where they live." He looked directly into the cameras now. "To the officers watching this, I was one of you before I joined the Bureau. I know the challenges you face, the split-second decisions you have to make, the danger that can come from any direction. This isn't about making your job harder, it's about making it better. It's about giving you the tools to serve your communities more effectively and with more trust." Marcus could see nods from some of the officers present, though others remained stoic. "Finally, to the communities who have felt the weight of unequal treatment, I hear you. I see you. And I promise you that this task force will not be just another committee that issues a report that sits on a shelf. We will make real change, starting here in Oak Ridge." As Marcus finished his statement and opened the floor for questions, he noticed a figure at the back of the crowd. Officer Donovan, out of uniform, his face a mask of barely contained anger. Their eyes met briefly before Donovan turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The first question came from a local reporter. "Agent Wilson, how do you respond to those who say you're using your position of privilege to make this about yourself?" Marcus nodded, having anticipated this line of questioning. "I'm using my position to bring attention to an issue that affects millions of Americans who don't have badges or platforms. If this had happened to anyone else in my neighborhood, there would be no press conference, no task force, and possibly no accountability. That's precisely the problem I'm trying to address." Another reporter stepped forward. Chief Grayson, do you support this task force, and will there be consequences for the officers involved in Agent Wilson's detention? Chief Grayson approached the microphone, his expression carefully neutral. The Oak Ridge Police Department is committed to serving all members of our community fairly and respectfully. We welcome the opportunity to work with Agent Wilson and the FBI on this initiative. As for the officers involved, they are currently on administrative duty, pending an internal investigation. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, ranging from specific details about the task force to broader issues of policing in America. Throughout, Marcus maintained his composed, measured tone, even when the questions became pointed or accusatory. As the press conference wound down, Director Harris stepped forward to add the Bureau's official endorsement of the task force, emphasizing that this was not just about one incident, but about improving law enforcement practices nationwide. After the last question, Marcus stepped away from the podium, shaking hands with colleagues and community leaders who had gathered to show support. Chief Grayson approached, extending his hand. "That was quite a statement, Agent Wilson," he said, his tone unreadable. Marcus accepted the handshake. "I meant every word." "I know you did," Grayson replied. "And that's what worries me. Expectations are high now. If this task force fails—" "It won't," Marcus said firmly. "Not if we're both committed to making it work." Grayson nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "We'll talk details tomorrow. My office, 9 a.m. As the chief walked away, Diana joined Marcus, her expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You did good, but you've also painted a target on your back." "I know," Marcus acknowledged. "Did you see Donovan in the crowd?" "No. Why?" "He was watching. Not in uniform, but he was here." Diana frowned. "You think he's the one sending the threats?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Back at the FBI field office, Marcus found his desk covered with notes of support from colleagues. Some he knew well, others he'd barely spoken to before. It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one. The video had resonated within the Bureau, too, reminding agents that their badges didn't make them immune to the biases that permeated society. Marcus had just settled in when his phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. "Nice speech. Hope you've got eyes in the back of your head." He forwarded it immediately to the cyber team, who had been working to trace the source. Within minutes, his desk phone rang. "Wilson," he answered. "Agent Wilson, this is Technician Patel from Cyber. We've been tracking those messages, and we've got something interesting. They're coming from a burner phone, but the cell tower data places it near the Oak Ridge Police Department during each transmission." Marcus felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. "Can you narrow it down more specifically?" "Not enough to identify the sender yet," Patel replied. "But we're working on it. I thought you should know the general location." "Thanks, Patel. Keep me posted." As Marcus hung up, Director Harris appeared at his desk. "Got a minute?" They walked to Harris's office in silence, the weight of unspoken concerns hanging between them. Once inside, Harris closed the door and gestured for Marcus to sit. "The task force has been officially approved," Harris began. "You'll have resources, personnel, whatever you need. But I want to talk about these threats you're receiving." Marcus nodded. "Cyber traced them to a cell tower near the Oak Ridge PD. Which means it could be a cop," Harris concluded. "That complicates things." "It does," Marcus agreed. "But it also confirms that this work is necessary. If someone's willing to threaten a federal agent over a training program, imagine how they treat civilians who have no badge to protect them." Harris leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus carefully. "I've known you for what, 15 years? You've always been by the book, methodical, calm under pressure. But this is different. This is personal for you." "Yes," Marcus admitted. "It is. But that doesn't mean I'm wrong." "No, it doesn't," Harris agreed. Just be careful. Changing a culture isn't easy, and there will be resistance, some of it ugly, some of it dangerous. Marcus understood the warning. I'll be careful. Good, Harris said. Now let's talk logistics for this task force. They spent the next hour discussing details, staffing, curriculum, timeline. By the time Marcus left Harris's office, the framework for the task force was taking shape. It would include 6 FBI agents, including Diana, and 6 officers from the Oak Ridge PD to be selected by Chief Grayson with Marcus's approval. The initial training would last 8 weeks, followed by a community outreach phase and ongoing evaluation. As Marcus headed home that evening, he noticed a dark sedan following him, keeping a consistent 3 car lengths behind. At the first opportunity, he made a series of random turns, confirming his suspicion when the sedan matched his movements. Rather than leading them to his house, Marcus drove directly to the Oak Ridge Police Department, pulling into a visitor space. The sedan drove past slowly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the driver, Officer Reed, his face expressionless as their eyes met briefly. A warning or simple surveillance. Either way, the message was clear. Marcus was being watched. Inside the station, the front desk officer recognized him immediately. Agent Wilson, can I help you? I'd like to speak with Officer Reed, please. Officer Reed isn't on duty right now, the desk officer replied, though something in his expression suggested otherwise. That's interesting, Marcus said, his voice level but firm, because he's currently sitting in a sedan outside your parking lot after following me from my office. The desk officer's eyes widened slightly. I'll see if I can reach him. Marcus waited, standing perfectly still in the middle of the lobby, aware of the eyes on him from various corners of the room. After several minutes, the desk officer returned. I'm sorry, Agent Wilson. Officer Reed must have gone off duty after his shift. Is there something I can help you with? Marcus smiled thinly. Yes, actually. Please let Chief Grayson know that if his officers continue to follow me outside of official duty, I'll be adding harassment charges to our agenda for tomorrow's meeting. He turned and walked out, sensing the tension he'd left in his wake. As he expected, the sedan was gone. Marcus drove home, taking a circuitous route to ensure he wasn't followed again, thoughts of the task force and the threats turning in his mind. The battle lines were being drawn, and Marcus knew that the press conference had been just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, changing minds that didn't want to be changed, confronting biases that ran deeper than policies could reach, and building bridges between communities and the officers sworn to protect them. It wouldn't be easy, but few things worth doing ever were. And as Marcus pulled into his driveway, noticing Officer Johnson's cruiser still vigilantly parked across the street, he was reminded that he wasn't fighting this battle alone. The morning meeting with Chief Grayson went about as well as Marcus had expected, professionally cordial on the surface with undercurrents of tension that neither man acknowledged directly. They sat across from each other in Grayson's office, the chief's desk between them like a demilitarized zone, as they discussed the logistics of the task force. I've selected our 6 officers, Grayson said, sliding a folder across the desk. Their files are all in there for your review. Marcus opened the folder and scanned the names, immediately noting that neither Donovan nor Reed was on the list. Instead, Grayson had chosen a mix of veterans and younger officers, including Officer Johnson. Interesting selections, Marcus commented. No Donovan or Reed. Grayson's expression hardened slightly. I thought it would be counterproductive given the circumstances. Marcus nodded, continuing to review the files. The officers Grayson had selected had largely clean records with commendations for community service and de-escalation. It was a promising start, though Marcus wondered if they truly represented the department or if Grayson was simply putting his best faces forward. These look good, Marcus said finally. I'll have my team ready to meet with them on Monday to begin the training program. About that, Grayson interjected. "I'd like to know more about what exactly this training entails. My officers are already trained professionals." Marcus had anticipated this resistance. "They're trained in law enforcement techniques, Chief. What we're offering is something different, a comprehensive look at implicit bias, community relations, and the historical context of policing in minority communities." Grayson leaned back in his chair, his skepticism evident. "And you think that's going to change anything on the street? When an officer has a split second to decide if someone's reaching for a weapon?" "Yes," Marcus said firmly, "because those split-second decisions don't happen in a vacuum. They're influenced by how officers perceive threats, who they see as dangerous, what stereotypes they've internalized, often without even realizing it." The chief fell silent, considering Marcus's words. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, Monday, 9 a.m. But I want to be there, and I want regular reports on how it's progressing." As Marcus stood to leave, Grayson added, "One more thing, Agent Wilson, about your complaint regarding Officer Reed following you. He claims he was simply driving home and happened to be going the same direction." Marcus met the chief's gaze steadily. "We both know that's not true, and if it happens again, I won't be coming to you first. I'll be filing an official harassment complaint with both our agencies." The implied threat hung in the air between them as Marcus left the office. He had worked with enough reluctant witnesses and suspects over the years to recognize when someone was holding back information. Chief Grayson knew more than he was saying, but Marcus couldn't yet determine if it was simply departmental protectiveness or something more concerning. Outside the station, Marcus checked his phone to find a text from Diana. "Cyber has an update on those messages. Meet me at the office ASAP." When Marcus arrived at the FBI field office, Diana was waiting with technician Patel, who looked both excited and nervous. "We've narrowed down the location of those threatening texts," Patel began as soon as they were seated in a conference room. "They're definitely coming from inside the Oak Ridge Police Department, but not from the main building, from their satellite office across town." Marcus exchanged glances with Diana. "The satellite office is where their specialized units operate. SWAT, undercover, some of their detective divisions." "Can you tell which specific device is sending them?" Diana asked. Patel shook his head. "Not yet. The burner phone is only powered on for short periods, just long enough to send the messages. Then it's either turned off or the battery is removed. But we do have a time pattern. The messages are always sent during shift changes, when the satellite office is at its busiest." "Smart," Marcus murmured. "Maximum cover, minimum chance of being spotted." "There's more," Patel added. "We ran an analysis on the language patterns in the messages. Based on word choice, syntax, and punctuation, we believe they're coming from someone with at least some college education, possibly with military background." Marcus thought of Officer Donovan, who he knew was a former Marine. But he couldn't jump to conclusions. Many officers had military backgrounds, and the profile wasn't specific enough to point to any individual. "Keep on it," he told Patel, "and let me know immediately if you get anything more concrete." After Patel left, Diana turned to Marcus with concern in her eyes. "This is escalating, Marcus. Maybe you should consider a protective detail." Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. I don't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they've rattled me." "It's not about satisfaction," Diana argued. "It's about safety. Whoever's sending these messages has access to police resources, knows your movements, and clearly has a grudge." "All the more reason to push forward with the task force," Marcus replied. "The threats just prove how necessary this work is." Diana sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of his jaw. "At least let me check in with you regularly, and maybe vary your routine, take different routes home." "Already doing that," Marcus assured her, "and I appreciate the concern. But right now we need to focus on getting this task force up and running." They spent the rest of the day finalizing the curriculum for the training program, drawing on resources from the FBI's Civil Rights Division and consulting with academic experts on implicit bias in community policing. By the time Marcus headed home that evening, they had a comprehensive 8-week program outlined, covering everything from the historical roots of policing to practical scenarios and community engagement strategies. The weekend passed without incident, no threatening messages, no mysterious cars following him, which made Marcus more suspicious, not less. It felt like the calm before a storm, a tactical pause before the next move. Monday morning arrived with a sense of anticipation and tension. Marcus arrived at the Oak Ridge Police Department's training facility 30 minutes early, wanting to settle in and prepare before the officers arrived. Diana and the rest of the FBI team joined him shortly after, setting up materials and reviewing the day's agenda. At precisely 9 a.m., Chief Grayson arrived with the 6 selected officers. Officer Johnson nodded respectfully to Marcus as she entered, while the others regarded him with expressions ranging from curious to cautious to openly skeptical. "Good morning," Marcus began once everyone was seated. "I want to thank you all for being here. I know some of you may have reservations about this program, and that's okay. Skepticism is natural when facing change, but I ask that you approach these next 8 weeks with an open mind." He moved to the front of the room, making eye contact with each officer. "This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about becoming better at what we all signed up to do: protect and serve our communities, all of our communities, equally and fairly." Marcus paused, gauging the response. Most of the officers remained impassive, though Officer Johnson gave a small nod of encouragement. "Let's start with introductions," Marcus continued. "I'd like each of you to share not just your name and rank, but why you decided to become a police officer in the first place. What drove you to put on the badge?" The exercise was designed to reconnect the officers with their original motivations, to remind them of the idealism and sense of justice that had drawn them to law enforcement before years on the job had potentially hardened or cynically reframed those initial impulses. One by one, the officers shared their stories, protecting communities like the ones they grew up in, following family traditions of service, seeking justice after personal experiences with crime. As they spoke, the atmosphere in the room gradually shifted from guarded to engaged, the officers remembering the core values that had guided their career choices. Officer Johnson was the last to speak. "I became a cop because I grew up in a neighborhood where we were afraid of the police, not protected by them," she said, her voice steady but passionate. "I wanted to change that, to be the kind of officer I needed to see when I was a kid." Her words hung in the air, resonating with the themes Marcus hoped to develop throughout the program. He thanked her, then transitioned to the first module, a historical overview of policing in America, with particular attention to its complicated relationship with communities of color. As Marcus and Diana presented the material, they could see the officers processing, some with furrowed brows, others with dawning recognition. It wasn't easy content to absorb, especially for those who had never considered policing through this historical lens before, but they were listening, engaging, asking questions. It was a start. The morning session ended with a discussion that, while occasionally tense, remained respectful and productive. As they broke for lunch, Marcus felt cautiously optimistic. These officers at least seemed willing to engage with the material even if they didn't agree with all of it. He was about to join Diana and the others in the break room when Officer Johnson approached him. "Agent Wilson, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Marcus nodded, leading her to a quiet corner of the training room. Johnson glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard before speaking in a low voice. "I thought you should know. There's been talk around the department. Donovan and Reed aren't happy about being left off the task force. They've been vocal about it, especially Donovan. Marcus wasn't surprised, but he appreciated the information. Vocal in what way? Johnson shifted uncomfortably. He's been saying this whole thing is a witch hunt against good cops, that you're using what happened to push some kind of political agenda, and... She hesitated, clearly debating whether to continue. Go on, Marcus encouraged her. He's been spending a lot of time at the satellite office lately, even though his assignments don't require him to be there, and he's been huddled with some of the SWAT guys, the ones who tend to resist any kind of reform. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach as he connected the dots. The threatening messages traced to the satellite office, Donovan's increased presence there, his military background matching Patel's linguistic profile. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to elevate his suspicions. Thank you for telling me this, Marcus said. Is there anything else I should know? Johnson nodded grimly. Just watch your back, Agent Wilson. Donovan's got friends in the department, people who think like he does. Not everyone wants this task force to succeed. As Officer Johnson walked away to join the others for lunch, Marcus remained in the training room, letting the information settle. The path forward was becoming clearer, but also more dangerous. If Donovan was indeed behind the threats, confronting him directly could escalate the situation, but ignoring the warning signs wasn't an option either. Marcus decided to share Johnson's information with Diana and update Patel's team to focus their investigation more specifically on Donovan's activities at the satellite office. He wouldn't accuse anyone without evidence, but he could quietly gather that evidence while continuing the work of the task force. As Marcus joined the others for lunch, he noticed Chief Grayson watching him from across the room, his expression unreadable. The chief had been notably quiet during the morning session, observing rather than participating. Marcus wondered which side Grayson would ultimately take if the internal resistance to the task force grew. Would he stand by his commitment to reform, or would departmental loyalty win out? The answer to that question might determine not just the success of the task force, but potentially Marcus's safety as well. As he sat down beside Diana, Marcus realized that the next few weeks would test not only his professional skills but his personal resolve. This wasn't just about training programs and policy changes anymore. It was about challenging a deeply entrenched culture that some would fight to protect by any means necessary. The first week of training passed more smoothly than Marcus had anticipated. The 6 officers selected by Chief Grayson engaged with the material thoughtfully, even when it challenged their perspectives. By Friday afternoon, as they wrapped up a session on the psychological underpinnings of implicit bias, Marcus could see the beginnings of change. Small shifts in language, more nuanced questions, a willingness to consider alternatives to entrenched policing methods. Great work today, everyone, Marcus said as they concluded. Next week we'll move from theory to practice, examining real-world scenarios and discussing alternative approaches. As the officers filed out, Diana approached Marcus with a concerned expression. You need to see this, she said quietly, showing him her tablet. It was a social media post from a page called Blue Line Defenders, an anonymous account claiming to represent officers from various departments in the area. The post featured a photo of Marcus taken during the press conference with text overlaid. This man wants to destroy policing as we know it, stand up against the witch hunt. Marcus frowned. When was this posted? This morning, Diana replied. It's already been shared hundreds of times, mostly in pro-police groups. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from the now familiar unknown number. How's the brainwashing going? Turning good cops against their own. This won't end well for you. Marcus showed the message to Diana, who immediately contacted Patel to add it to their investigation. This is escalating, she noted. They're not just threatening you privately anymore, they're trying to mobilize opposition. Which means we're making progress, Marcus said, though he couldn't entirely suppress the concern building in his chest. If we weren't having an impact, they wouldn't feel the need to push back this hard. As they packed up their materials, Officer Johnson lingered behind, waiting until the room was empty before approaching them. "Agent Wilson, I thought you should know. There's a meeting happening tonight at O'Malley's bar. Unofficial, off-duty, but word is Donovan's organizing it. They're calling it a strategy session for preserving departmental integrity." Marcus exchanged glances with Diana. "Do you know who's attending?" Johnson nodded. "About 15 officers, mostly veterans, a few from SWAT. And..." She hesitated. "Chief Grayson was invited." That was unexpected. "Did he accept?" "I don't know," Johnson admitted, "but the invitation alone is concerning. It suggests they believe he might be sympathetic to their position." Marcus thanked her for the information. Once Johnson had left, Diana turned to him with a serious expression. "We need to know what happens at that meeting." "Agreed," Marcus said, "but we can't exactly show up and take notes." Diana's lips curved into a small smile. "No, but we have other resources." She made a quick call, speaking in low tones before hanging up. "We'll have someone there, discreet but effective." "FBI undercover?" Marcus asked, impressed at her quick thinking. "Better," Diana replied. "A trusted CI who bartends at O'Malley's 3 nights a week, including tonight. We've worked with him before. He's reliable and practically invisible behind the bar." That evening, Marcus found himself restlessly pacing his living room waiting for updates. The cyber team had set up enhanced security on his home network and installed surveillance cameras around his property. But these precautions did little to ease his tension. It wasn't fear that kept him on edge. It was the frustration of knowing that while he worked to build bridges, others were actively trying to undermine those efforts. His phone rang just after 11 p.m. "Diana." "Our friend at O'Malley's just reported in," she said without preamble. "Grayson didn't show, but Donovan and 12 other officers did. The conversation got heated, with Donovan pushing for more aggressive resistance to the task force." "What kind of resistance?" Marcus asked, already dreading the answer. "Nothing explicitly threatening," Diana replied, "but lots of talk about showing Wilson he can't change the department from the outside and reminding him who really runs these streets. Donovan was particularly vocal, calling you, and I'm quoting here, a bureau puppet using one incident to push a political agenda." Marcus absorbed this information, fitting it into the larger picture. "Any mention of the social media campaign or the messages?" "No," Diana said. "If Donovan's behind those, he's keeping it separate. But our CI did overhear something interesting. Donovan mentioning that Phase 2 would start next week. No details on what that means." After they hung up, Marcus stood at his living room window, looking out at the quiet street. Officer Johnson's cruiser was parked in its now familiar spot across from his house, a small comfort amid growing uncertainty. Whatever Phase 2 entailed, Marcus needed to be prepared. The weekend passed without incident, giving Marcus time to review the first week's progress and prepare for the next phase of training. By Sunday evening, he had developed a series of practical scenarios based on real incidents, designed to challenge the officers' decision-making processes and highlight alternatives to traditional approaches. Monday morning brought rain, heavy sheets of water that reduced visibility and cast a gray pall over the city. Marcus arrived at the training facility early as usual, only to find the parking lot surprisingly empty. As he gathered his materials from the trunk, a familiar voice called out behind him, "Agent Wilson." Marcus turned to find Officer Reed standing under an umbrella, his expression somber. There was no sign of his usual partner, Donovan. "Officer Reed," Marcus acknowledged cautiously. "Can I help you with something?" Reed looked around nervously before stepping closer. "I need to talk to you. Not here, though." Marcus studied him, trying to gauge his intentions. "Why should I trust you? The last time I saw you, you were following me in an unmarked car." Reed's jaw tightened. "I know how it looks, but things have changed. I've been listening to the reports from the officers in your program. They say it's not what Donovan's been claiming, that you're not trying to tear down the department, just improve it." "That's right," Marcus confirmed, still wary. "Look," Reed continued, his voice dropping lower, "I'm not proud of what happened that night or of following you afterward. But Donovan's taking this too far. He's organizing something, and I think you need to know about it." Before Reed could elaborate, another car pulled into the lot, Diana arriving for the day's session. Reed stepped back quickly. "Not now. Meet me at Riverside Park, near the boat ramp, tonight at 8. Come alone." With that, he turned and hurried to his car, leaving Marcus to consider the unusual encounter. When Diana joined him, he relayed the conversation, watching her skepticism mirror his own. "It could be a trap," she warned, "lure you to an isolated location after dark." "Or he could genuinely want to help," Marcus countered. "Either way, we need to know what he knows." "Then we take precautions," Diana insisted. "I'll be nearby with backup, and you'll wear a wire." The day's training session proceeded as planned, though Marcus found it difficult to focus entirely on the material. The participating officers noticed nothing amiss, engaging with the practical scenarios and discussing alternative approaches to tense situations they might encounter on patrol. Officer Johnson was particularly insightful, drawing on her experiences growing up in a community with strained police relations to offer perspectives that many of her colleagues had never considered. By the end of the day, even the most initially resistant officers were acknowledging that there might be better ways to handle certain situations than those they'd been taught in traditional police training. As the session concluded, Chief Grayson appeared at the door, the first time he'd attended since the opening day. He observed silently from the back of the room as Marcus wrapped up, his expression revealing nothing. "A word, Agent Wilson?" Grayson requested as the officers filed out. Once they were alone, Grayson's professional facade cracked slightly, revealing what appeared to be genuine concern. "I've heard rumors about a meeting at O'Malley's Friday night, officers discussing ways to resist this task force." Marcus nodded, watching Grayson carefully. "I heard the same. I was told you were invited." "I was," Grayson confirmed. "I declined. Whatever my personal feelings about this program, it's happening under my authority. I won't undermine it behind closed doors." "I appreciate that," Marcus said, genuinely surprised by Grayson's candor. The chief hesitated, then added, "You should know that Donovan has been vocal, more than usual, and he has influence, especially among some of the older officers in the specialized units." "Are you concerned about what he might do?" Marcus asked directly. Grayson's gaze shifted away momentarily. "Let's just say I've asked Officer Johnson to continue her protective detail on your home indefinitely." The implications of that decision weren't lost on Marcus. Whatever Grayson knew or suspected, it was serious enough to warrant continued protection. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. Grayson nodded once, then turned to leave, pausing at the door. "This program, it's not what I expected. The officers participating, they've been thoughtful about it, more open than I anticipated." It wasn't exactly an endorsement, but coming from Grayson, it felt like a significant admission. Marcus allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism as the chief departed. That evening, as darkness fell and the rain continued in a steady drizzle, Marcus drove to Riverside Park. The boat ramp area was deserted, the weather keeping even the most dedicated anglers at home. Diana and 2 other agents were positioned discreetly nearby, while Marcus wore a small transmitter concealed under his jacket. He parked in the designated area and waited, windshield wipers keeping rhythm with the rain. At precisely 8 o'clock, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, a sedan pulling in and parking several spaces away. Officer Reed emerged alone, hunched against the rain as he approached Marcus's car. Marcus stepped out to meet him, rain immediately soaking through his light jacket. "I'm here," he said simply. "What was so important that we needed to meet like this?" Reed looked around nervously before speaking, his voice barely audible above the patter of rain. "Donovan's planning something for Wednesday. He calls it sending a message. I don't know exactly what he means, but he's been meeting with some of the SWAT guys off duty and they've been accessing equipment from the satellite office." "What kind of equipment?" Marcus asked, alarm rising. "Surveillance gear mostly, but also some things they'd have no legitimate reason to sign out. Flashbangs, breaching tools." The implications were chilling. "You think they're planning some kind of operation?" Reed nodded grimly. "I think they want to scare you, maybe make it look like a mistaken address raid or something that could be explained away afterward. But it's serious, Agent Wilson. These guys aren't just talking anymore." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus pressed. "Why turn on your partner?" Reed's expression hardened. "Because this isn't what I signed up for. Detaining you that night was bad enough, but this is crossing a line I can't cross. And Donovan's not my partner anymore. Chief Grayson reassigned me last week. I think he suspects something too." As they stood in the rain, the gravity of the situation settled over Marcus like a physical weight. This wasn't just about threatening messages anymore. It was about a coordinated effort to intimidate or harm a federal agent, planned by sworn officers who had taken an oath to uphold the law. "I need names," Marcus said firmly. "Everyone involved, and I need any evidence you can provide. Texts, emails, meeting times, equipment logs." Reed hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll get you what I can, but you need to be careful. These guys know your routine, your habits, and they're serious about stopping what you're doing, whatever it takes." As Reed turned to leave, Marcus called after him. "Why Wednesday specifically?" Reed paused, rain streaming down his face. "It's the night Officer Johnson rotates off your protection detail. There will be a 2-hour gap before her replacement arrives." The calculated nature of the plan sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the rain. As Reed's car disappeared into the night, Marcus returned to his own vehicle, immediately briefing Diana and the other agents on what he'd learned. "We need to move on this now," Diana insisted. "Inform the Bureau, get a team in place before Wednesday." Marcus agreed, but a part of him wondered if this might be an opportunity, not just to stop one operation, but to expose the full extent of the resistance within the department. If they handled this correctly, they could potentially identify and remove multiple officers involved in the plot, creating space for real, lasting change. As they drove away from the park, Marcus made a decision. They would prepare for Wednesday, but not just defensively. This would be the moment that determined whether the task force would ultimately succeed or fail, not just in Oak Ridge, but as a model for departments nationwide. The game had changed, and so had the stakes. But Marcus had faced dangerous adversaries before. The difference was he'd never expected them to be wearing badges. Tuesday morning arrived with a sense of urgency that Marcus hadn't felt since his days working active terrorist threats. After Reed's warning, he had spent most of the night developing a plan with Diana and a select team from the FBI's field office. Director Harris had been briefed and had authorized a covert operation to monitor and, if necessary, intervene in whatever Donovan and his allies were planning. "We need to maintain the training schedule," Marcus insisted during their early morning strategy session. "Any disruption would tip them off that we know what's coming." Diana nodded, though concern creased her forehead. "We'll have surveillance in place around your house by this afternoon. Audio and video, covering all approaches. If they move on your place Wednesday night, we'll have everything documented." "What about Reed?" asked Agent Cortez, a tactical specialist brought in for the operation. "Can we trust his information?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think so. His body language, his tone. He seemed genuinely disturbed by what Donovan's planning. And Grayson separated him from Donovan, which suggests he's seen something in Reed that makes him salvageable." "Speaking of Grayson," Diana interjected, "what's his role in all this? Do we loop him in?" It was the question Marcus had been wrestling with all night. Grayson had shown signs of supporting the task force, but his loyalties were complex. Would he feel obligated to protect his officers, even from their own misconduct? Or would he stand by the principles he claimed to uphold? "Not yet," Marcus decided. "We gather evidence first, then bring it to him when it's irrefutable. That way, he's not caught between his duty and his department." The meeting concluded with assignments distributed and a surveillance schedule established. Marcus would proceed with the day's training as planned, while FBI technical teams would discreetly set up monitoring equipment around his property. Officer Johnson would continue her regular protection detail, unaware of the specific threat, but briefed to report any unusual activity. When Marcus arrived at the training facility, he found the 6 officers from the task force waiting with an air of anticipation. Today's session would focus on traffic stops, one of the most common and potentially volatile interactions between police and the public. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus began, setting aside his personal concerns to focus on the task at hand. "Today we're going to examine how routine procedures can either escalate or de-escalate a situation, particularly when there are cultural or racial dynamics at play." He pulled up footage from his own detention, body camera video from both Donovan and Reed that night on Maple Street. The officers shifted uncomfortably as they watched the encounter unfold from the perspective of the cameras. "Let's break this down step by step," Marcus said as the video played. "Notice the approach. Officer Donovan's hand is already near his weapon before any interaction occurs. What message does that send to someone being stopped?" Officer Johnson spoke up first. "It communicates threat before communication, puts the civilian immediately on defense." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "Now watch the language. Suspicious person. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" These phrases carry assumptions that can immediately create tension. Throughout the morning, they analyzed the footage in detail, identifying moments where different choices could have led to different outcomes. The officers engaged thoughtfully, many of them recognizing patterns they'd fallen into themselves during routine stops. By lunchtime, Marcus could sense a shift in the room, a deeper understanding of how procedural decisions influenced civilian responses. Even as part of his mind remained focused on the impending threat from Donovan, he felt a sense of satisfaction at the genuine progress these officers were making. As they broke for lunch, his phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Equipment in place. Surveillance active." Reed delivered equipment logs showing unauthorized removals from satellite office. "It's happening." The confirmation sent a jolt of adrenaline through Marcus's system. Donovan was actually going through with it, planning some kind of operation against a federal agent. The audacity was almost incomprehensible, yet the evidence was mounting. When the afternoon session resumed, Marcus found it increasingly difficult to focus solely on the training. His mind kept returning to Wednesday night, to the gap in his protection detail that Donovan planned to exploit. What exactly were they planning? A raid? Surveillance? Intimidation? Or something worse? At the end of the day, as the officers were gathering their things to leave, Chief Grayson appeared at the door again. His presence was becoming less unusual, but his expression, tight, concerned, caught Marcus's attention immediately. "Agent Wilson, could I have a word?" Grayson requested, gesturing to the hallway. Once they were alone, Grayson's professional demeanor slipped, revealing unmistakable worry. "I need to know if you've heard anything about unauthorized equipment being checked out of our satellite office." The directness of the question took Marcus by surprise. "Why do you ask?" Grayson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because I just received an anonymous tip about missing tactical gear, and the log has been altered to cover it up. The timing seems concerning." Marcus studied Grayson carefully, making a split-second decision about how much to reveal. "We've received similar information. There may be a situation developing, involving Officer Donovan and several others." "What kind of situation?" Grayson pressed. "We're still gathering details," Marcus replied cautiously. "But I think you should know that we have reason to believe they're planning some kind of action directed at me, possibly at my home." Grayson's face darkened, anger flashing in his eyes. "When?" "Tomorrow night." The chief absorbed this information, his jaw working as he processed the implications. "These are my officers," he said finally. "My responsibility." "With all due respect, Chief," Marcus countered, "if they're planning to intimidate or harm a federal agent, they've moved beyond departmental discipline into criminal territory." Grayson didn't argue the point. Instead, he asked, "What are you planning to do?" "We have surveillance in place," Marcus explained. "When they make their move, we'll document everything and make arrests if necessary." "Let me help," Grayson said, the offer surprising Marcus. "This is my department, my mess to clean up. If officers under my command are going rogue, I should be the one to confront them." Marcus considered the offer carefully. Having Grayson involved could complicate the operation, but it could also send a powerful message that corruption wouldn't be tolerated, even from within. "We'll need to coordinate with the Bureau team," Marcus said finally, "and you'd have to follow our operational protocol." Grayson nodded without hesitation. "Whatever it takes. These men don't represent what this department stands for. Not anymore." As they parted ways, Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope. Grayson's willingness to stand against his own officers suggested that the chief's commitment to reform might be more genuine than Marcus had initially believed. Back at the FBI field office, Marcus briefed Diana and the tactical team on Grayson's offer to assist. "Can we trust him?" Cortez asked bluntly. "I think so," Marcus replied. He seemed genuinely disturbed by what his officers are planning, and strategically having him there when we confront Donovan could be valuable. It removes any claim that this is the FBI overstepping or targeting local police. Director Harris agreed when consulted. "Bring him in, but keep him on a tight leash. This operation needs to be by the book. No room for departmental loyalty to override procedure." As evening fell, Marcus drove home with a Bureau surveillance team discreetly shadowing his vehicle. Officer Johnson's cruiser was parked in its usual spot across from his house, a reassuring presence even as Marcus knew she would be absent during the critical window tomorrow night. Inside, he conducted a thorough check of the newly installed security measures, cameras covering every approach to the house, audio sensors that would detect any unusual activity, silent alarms that would alert the FBI team stationed nearby. His home had become a high-tech trap, designed to catch Donovan and his accomplices in the act. Marcus spent the evening reviewing the evidence they had gathered so far. The equipment logs Reed had provided, showing unauthorized removal of tactical gear, the threatening text messages traced to the vicinity of the satellite office, statements from the confidential informant at O'Malley's bar. It was substantial but not yet conclusive. They needed to catch Donovan in the act to make charges stick. Around midnight, his phone rang, Reed calling from a burner phone. "It's definitely happening tomorrow," Reed said without preamble, his voice tense. "Donovan met with 4 others today, all SWAT, all off duty." They're planning to approach from the wooded area behind your property using night vision. They're calling it a training exercise if anyone questions them." "What's their objective?" Marcus asked, the tactical part of his brain already mapping out defensive positions. Reed hesitated. "They're calling it a scare tactic. Flashbangs, forced entry, masks. Make it look like a raid gone wrong at the wrong address. Shake you up enough that you back off the task force." "And if I don't back off?" Marcus pressed. The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. These men weren't planning to kill him. That would be too obvious, too easily traced. But they were willing to put him in a situation where accidents could happen, where fear and confusion could lead to tragic mistakes. "Be careful," Reed said finally. "These guys aren't thinking clearly anymore. Donovan's convinced them that you're trying to destroy their careers, their way of life. In their minds, they're protecting themselves." After hanging up, Marcus contacted Diana to relay the new information. The operation plan would need adjustments to account for the approach through the wooded area behind his property. Additional surveillance, repositioning of the FBI team to ensure they could intercept the group before they reached the house. "We should bring in Johnson," Diana suggested. "Tell her what's happening, so she's not caught by surprise when her shift ends tomorrow." Marcus agreed. Officer Johnson had proven herself trustworthy, and having her informed would provide an additional layer of security. They arranged to brief her discreetly before her shift began the following day. Wednesday dawned gray and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the tension that had settled over Marcus. He went through his morning routine mechanically, checking and rechecking his phone for updates from the surveillance team. The training session would continue as scheduled. Maintaining normalcy was crucial to avoid tipping off Donovan. When Marcus arrived at the training facility, the 6 officers were already waiting, unaware of the drama unfolding around them. Today's session focused on community engagement strategies, ways to build trust in neighborhoods with historically strained relationships with law enforcement. Despite the distraction of the impending operation, Marcus found himself fully engaged with the material. These officers represented the future he was fighting for, a police force that protected and served all communities equally, that recognized and corrected its biases, that earned trust rather than demanded compliance. Officer Johnson arrived midway through the morning, having been briefed by Diana before her shift. Her expression revealed nothing, but the slight nod she gave Marcus communicated her understanding of the situation. As the day progressed, updates from the surveillance team came in steadily. Movement at the satellite office. Donovan and the suspected accomplices observed gathering equipment. Chief Grayson arriving at the FBI command post to be briefed on the operation. By late afternoon, as the training session concluded, everything was in place. The trap was set. Marcus thanked the officers for their participation, knowing that by this time tomorrow, some of their colleagues might be facing federal charges for conspiracy against an agent. "You've all done exceptional work this week," he told them. "The progress you're making, the questions you're asking, it's exactly what this task force was designed to achieve. You're proving that meaningful change is possible, even in systems with deep-rooted traditions." As the officers filed out, Officer Johnson lingered behind, waiting until they were alone before speaking. "My relief will be late tonight," she said quietly. "I'm supposed to end my shift at 8 p.m., but there's been a scheduling issue with my replacement. He won't arrive until 10. Marcus nodded grimly. "Just as Reed warned, they've manufactured a window." "I won't leave my post," Johnson assured him. "Whatever they're planning, they'll have to go through me first." "No," Marcus said firmly. "Follow the revised schedule as if nothing's wrong. We need them to believe they have their opening. The FBI team will be in position before you leave." Johnson looked uncertain but nodded her agreement. "Be careful, Agent Wilson. Donovan's not just angry anymore. He's desperate. That makes him dangerous." As Marcus drove home that evening, He felt the weight of years of law enforcement experience settling on his shoulders. He had faced terrorists, organized crime, violent extremists. But there was something uniquely disturbing about facing a threat from those who had taken the same oath he had, who wore badges meant to represent justice and protection. The sun was setting as he arrived home, casting long shadows across Maple Street. Officer Johnson's cruiser was in its usual position, her silhouette visible behind the wheel. Marcus entered his house and methodically checked each room, confirming that the surveillance equipment was operational, that the FBI team monitoring remotely had clear visual and audio feeds. Then he waited, watching the sky darken outside his windows, knowing that somewhere in the gathering darkness, Donovan and his accomplices were preparing to make their move. The trap was set, the pieces in place. All that remained was for Donovan to spring it, and in doing so reveal exactly how far some officers would go to resist change. 8 o'clock came and went. From his darkened living room, Marcus watched as Officer Johnson's cruiser pulled away from the curb precisely on schedule, leaving the street momentarily empty. Within minutes, another patrol car would normally have taken its place. The gap in coverage orchestrated by Donovan's manipulation of the schedule would last exactly 2 hours. Marcus sat in near darkness, a single lamp casting minimal light in the kitchen, visible from outside, a calculated decision to make it appear as though he was home alone, unaware of any threat. In his ear, a small communication device connected him to Diana and the FBI tactical team positioned strategically around his property. "Johnson has cleared the area," Diana's voice came through clearly. "Thermal imaging shows no movement in the woods yet." Marcus acknowledged with a soft tap on his microphone. They had decided to keep radio communication to a minimum, reducing the risk of detection by Donovan's team, who might be monitoring police frequencies. In the FBI command van parked 3 blocks away, Chief Grayson sat beside Director Harris, watching the multiple camera feeds with growing tension. The operation had been meticulously planned. FBI agents in tactical gear were concealed at various points around Marcus's property, ready to intercept Donovan's group before they could reach the house. Additional agents were stationed in unmarked vehicles on adjacent streets, prepared to block any escape routes. At 8:27 p.m., the first alert came through. "Movement in the tree line," Agent Cortez reported quietly from his position at the rear of the property. 5 individuals advancing slowly. Night vision equipment confirmed. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, adrenaline sharpening his senses. After all the threats, all the warnings, Donovan was actually going through with it, leading a team of rogue officers in what amounted to an armed assault on a federal agent's home. "Hold positions," Director Harris instructed through the comm system. "Let them advance to the pre-designated interception point. We need clear visual confirmation of all suspects." The minutes stretched like hours as Marcus waited, watching the surveillance feeds on a tablet positioned beside him. The thermal imaging showed 5 heat signatures moving through the wooded area, stopping occasionally in a pattern that suggested tactical coordination. They were approaching with professional precision, using hand signals and maintaining formation. This was no improvised intimidation attempt, but a planned operation executed by trained officers. At 8:43 p.m., the group reached the edge of the woods, approximately 50 yards from the rear of Marcus's house. They paused, huddled together briefly, then separated into 2 smaller groups, 3 heading toward the back door, 2 circling toward the side of the house. "They're splitting up," Diana warned. "Team 1 track the group moving toward the side entrance. Team 2 maintain position for the main group." Marcus watched as the heat signatures advanced closer to his property. Even with the thermal imaging, it was impossible to identify faces, but the leader of the main group moved with a confidence and authority that matched Donovan's bearing. 30 yards from the house, Cortez updated. "They're carrying equipment cases, flashbang canisters visible." Marcus's jaw tightened. Flashbangs were disorientation devices, extremely loud, extremely bright, designed to stun and confuse targets before entry. In the hands of legitimate law enforcement, they were used in high-risk warrant executions. In this context, they represented a dangerous escalation. These officers weren't just planning to intimidate, they were preparing for a tactical assault. 20 yards, came the next update. They're donning masks now. On the thermal feed, Marcus could see the three figures stop briefly, reaching up to their faces, balaclavas or tactical masks, no doubt, to conceal their identities. Team 1 and Team 2, prepare to move on my mark, Director Harris instructed. Let them approach to the 15-yard line, then intercept. Identify yourselves clearly as FBI. Non-lethal takedowns only unless they present a direct threat. The tension in the command van was palpable as everyone watched the feed. Chief Grayson had gone pale, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief as he witnessed officers from his department crossing a line that could end their careers and possibly land them in federal prison. At precisely 8:52 p.m., the main group reached the 15-yard marker, a garden shed that provided the last bit of cover before the open yard leading to Marcus's back door. Execute, Harris commanded, his voice firm and controlled. What happened next unfolded with the chaotic precision of a well-planned operation meeting unexpected resistance. The FBI teams emerged from their concealed positions, powerful lights suddenly illuminating the yard as they identified themselves clearly. FBI, freeze, drop your weapons and equipment. For a split second, the masked figures seemed frozen in shock. Then instincts took over. Two immediately dropped to the ground as trained. But the leader, Donovan, Marcus was certain, hesitated only briefly before reaching for what appeared to be a flashbang canister. "Drop it now," came the warning from Agent Cortez. Instead, Donovan hurled the canister toward the agents. It detonated with a deafening boom and blinding flash, momentarily disorienting the FBI team. In that chaos, Donovan turned and sprinted back toward the woods. "Suspect fleeing northeast into the tree line," Cortez reported through the ringing in his ears. "The other two are secured." Meanwhile, at the side of the house, the second FBI team had successfully intercepted and detained the other two officers without incident. They had surrendered immediately upon being confronted, dropping their equipment and raising their hands. "All units converge on the northeast quadrant," Harris directed. "Suspect is armed and has demonstrated hostile intent. Exercise extreme caution." Marcus stood from his position, his training overriding the instruction to remain inside. "I'm moving to support," he communicated, drawing his service weapon. "Negative," Harris countered. "Stay in position, Wilson." But Marcus was already moving through his house toward the side door, where he could exit and circle around to cut off Donovan's escape route. He knew these woods better than anyone involved. He ran through them 3 times a week as part of his exercise routine. Outside, the night air was cool against his face as he moved swiftly but cautiously along the perimeter of his property. He could hear the FBI teams coordinating their pursuit through his earpiece, tracking Donovan as he crashed through the underbrush, trying to reach the street on the other side of the wooded area. Marcus took a parallel path, moving quietly through familiar terrain. He knew Donovan would head for the narrow creek that cut through the woods. It was the most direct route to the road beyond, where he might have a vehicle waiting. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly as Marcus cut through a dense thicket, emerging on the bank of the shallow creek just as a dark figure splashed across the water. Even in the dim moonlight filtering through the trees, the silhouette was unmistakable. Donovan, mask removed now, face contorted with desperation. "Donovan," Marcus called out firmly, his weapon raised. "FBI, it's over." Donovan froze mid-stride, water swirling around his ankles. For a moment, neither man moved, the only sound the gentle gurgle of the creek and their heavy breathing. "You," Donovan finally said, his voice thick with bitterness. "You did this. You're destroying everything." "You did this," Marcus countered, keeping his weapon trained on Donovan. "You chose to target a federal agent. You chose to misuse police equipment. You chose to betray your oath." Donovan's hand hovered near his waistband, where Marcus could see the outline of a sidearm. "You don't understand," he growled. "You come in here with your task force, your reforms, making us look like the bad guys. 20 years I've given to this job, 20 years making split-second decisions that people like you second-guess from behind a desk." "I'm not second-guessing," Marcus replied, taking a cautious step forward. "I'm trying to make sure those split-second decisions aren't clouded by biases that get innocent people hurt. That's all this has ever been about." In the distance, Marcus could hear the FBI team approaching, crashing through the underbrush. They would be there within seconds. Donovan seemed to realize it too. His hand moved slightly closer to his weapon. "I'm not going down for this. Not like this." "Think about what you're doing," Marcus warned, his voice level despite the escalating danger. "Your team is already in custody. There are a dozen FBI agents converging on this position. This only ends one way if you reach for that gun, and you know it." Something flickered across Donovan's face, a moment of clarity breaking through the desperation. His shoulders sagged slightly as the reality of his situation dawned on him. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice suddenly hollow. "Now you surrender," Marcus said simply. "You face the consequences of your actions just like anyone else who breaks the law." For a tense moment, Marcus thought Donovan might still resist. Then, with a defeated gesture, the officer raised his hands slowly above his head. "On your knees, hands behind your head," Marcus instructed, advancing cautiously through the shallow water. As Donovan complied, the FBI tactical team burst through the trees, weapons drawn. They secured Donovan quickly, handcuffing him with the same efficiency he had once used to restrain Marcus on that fateful night on Maple Street. The irony wasn't lost on either man as their eyes met one final time while Donovan was led away. In that look was a complex mix of emotions, anger, resentment, but also, perhaps, the faintest glimmer of understanding. The world Donovan had known, the policing culture he had embraced, was changing. Tonight's events were both a result of that change and a catalyst for more to come. Back at Marcus's house, the scene was controlled chaos. FBI vehicles, police cars, evidence teams processing the equipment Donovan's group had brought. The 4 officers captured at the scene were seated in separate vehicles, their expressions ranging from defiant to shell-shocked as the reality of their situation sank in. Chief Grayson stood in the driveway watching as Donovan was brought back in handcuffs and placed in an FBI transport vehicle. His face was a mask of controlled fury, not directed at Marcus or the FBI, but at the officers who had betrayed their badges. "I want to apologize," Grayson said as Marcus approached. "This happened under my watch in my department." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the apology without dismissing the seriousness of what had occurred. "The important thing is that you're standing on the right side now. That sends a message to every officer in your department." "There will be changes," Grayson promised, his voice firm with resolve. "Significant ones. Starting with a full review of every officer who has worked closely with Donovan over the past 5 years. Diana joined them, looking exhausted but satisfied. "We've secured all the evidence, including the unauthorized equipment. Combined with the surveillance footage, the text messages, and Officer Reed's testimony, we have an airtight case." "What about Reed?" Marcus asked. "Where does he stand in all this?" "Cooperating fully," Diana confirmed, "in exchange for reduced charges. He made the right choice in the end, turning against Donovan when he realized how far this was going." As the scene gradually cleared, Marcus stood on his front porch watching the last of the vehicles drive away. Officer Johnson had returned, having been notified of the operation's conclusion, and resumed her position across the street. She gave Marcus a respectful nod, a simple gesture that conveyed both relief at the outcome and determination to continue the work they had started. The night's events had been a turning point, not just for the Oak Ridge Police Department, but potentially for departments across the country. What had begun with a single incident of racial profiling had exposed a deeper resistance to change, a willingness by some officers to cross lines that should never be crossed. But it had also revealed allies in unexpected places. Reed finding his conscience, Johnson standing firm for what was right, and ultimately Grayson choosing accountability over blind loyalty to his officers. As Marcus finally re-entered his home, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, media inquiries, official statements, the complex process of charging law enforcement officers with federal crimes, but it would also bring new opportunities to push forward with the reforms the task force had been created to implement. The handcuffs that had been meant to intimidate him that night on Maple Street had instead set in motion a chain of events that could transform policing in Oak Ridge and beyond. It wasn't the outcome Donovan had expected when he first approached Marcus with suspicion and bias, but it was the outcome that justice demanded. The morning after Donovan's arrest broke across news outlets like a thunderclap. By sunrise, national networks had picked up the story, their headlines stark and attention-grabbing. FBI arrests police officers planning raid on agent's home. Rogue cops targeted FBI agent leading reform task force. Police corruption exposed in Oak Ridge. Marcus woke to his phone buzzing incessantly with notifications, calls from reporters, messages from colleagues across the country, and a series of increasingly urgent texts from Director Harris. Press conference at 10, Bureau HQ, we need to get ahead of this. As Marcus prepared for the day, he watched the coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The facts were being reported accurately, but the framing varied widely depending on the outlet. Some positioned it as a few bad apples in an otherwise honorable profession. Others used it as evidence of systemic problems in policing nationwide. The truth, as Marcus knew, lay somewhere in the complex middle. He arrived at FBI headquarters to find a media circus, satellite trucks, camera crews, reporters jostling for position outside the press briefing room. Inside, Director Harris was huddled with the Bureau's public affairs team, reviewing talking points and anticipating questions. "There you are," Harris said as Marcus entered. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Marcus assured him, more concerned about how this affects the task force going forward. Harris nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what we need to address. This can't just be about Donovan and his cronies. It has to be about the positive changes we're working toward." Chief Grayson arrived minutes later, looking as though he hadn't slept. His uniform was impeccable as always, but the strain of the past 24 hours showed in the deep lines around his eyes and the tight set of his jaw. "5 officers," he said without preamble as he joined them. "5 of my officers in federal custody. I spent all night reviewing their personnel files, looking for warning signs I missed." And Marcus prompted gently. Grayson sighed heavily. They were there. Excessive force complaints that were dismissed too quickly, racial disparities in their arrest records, concerning statements from community members that were never properly investigated. I should have seen it. "What matters now is what you do with that knowledge," Marcus said. "How you use it to change things going forward." The press conference began precisely at 10 a.m., with Director Harris taking the lead. He outlined the facts of the case with clinical precision: the threatening messages, the surveillance operation, the arrests of 5 Oak Ridge police officers, including Donovan. He emphasized the cooperation between the FBI and Chief Grayson, presenting a united front rather than an adversarial relationship. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he approached the podium with a clear purpose. This wasn't just about one incident or one group of officers. It was about the larger mission he had embarked on when he first proposed the task force. Last night's events were disturbing, But they also represent an opportunity, Marcus began. An opportunity to acknowledge that resistance to change can sometimes take extreme forms, but also that progress is possible when good people stand together for what's right. He continued, his voice steady and purposeful. The task force that Officer Donovan and his accomplices tried to derail will continue its work. In fact, it will expand. What happened in Oak Ridge isn't unique. Similar dynamics exist in departments across the country. But neither is the commitment to improvement that we've seen from Chief Grayson and the officers who have engaged constructively with our training program. Marcus glanced at Grayson, who gave him a small nod of appreciation. This isn't about vilifying police. It's about building a better system of policing, one that serves all communities equally, one that recognizes and corrects its biases, one that earns trust rather than demanding compliance. The questions from reporters came rapidly after their statements concluded, some pointed, some provocative, all probing for deeper implications or potential conflicts between the agencies. Throughout, Marcus and Grayson maintained their united front, neither downplaying the seriousness of what had occurred nor allowing it to overshadow the constructive work still being done. By the time they left the briefing room, the narrative had been effectively shaped, not as a scandal that would tear apart law enforcement, but as a necessary cleansing that would ultimately strengthen it. "You handled that well," Harris commented as they walked back to his office. "Kept the focus where it needs to be." Marcus nodded, though his mind was already shifting to the practical implications. What happens with the task force now? Do we continue as planned, or does this change the approach? "That's largely up to you," Harris replied. "You've got the Bureau's full support, but the landscape has changed. The spotlight is on now, national attention, political interest. How do you want to proceed?" It was a weighty question, one that Marcus had been considering since watching Donovan being led away in handcuffs. The initial plan had been localized: reform one department, create a model that could be replicated elsewhere. But now, with national media attention and 5 officers facing federal charges, there was an opportunity to think bigger. "I want to expand it," Marcus decided. "Not just Oak Ridge, but 3 or 4 departments in different regions. Create a comprehensive program that addresses various policing contexts, urban, suburban, rural. Show that this isn't just about one incident or one department, but about improving policing nationwide." Harris smiled slightly. "I had a feeling you'd say that. I've already spoken with the Director of Justice Programs. They're interested in providing funding if we can demonstrate results." As they continued discussing the logistics of expansion, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Officers from the task force are asking to meet. They want to continue training despite everything. Johnson says it's important." The message filled Marcus with a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the arrests, despite the media frenzy, the core work of the task force, the officers who had committed to learning and changing, remained intact. That was the foundation upon which lasting reform could be built. That afternoon, Marcus returned to the Oak Ridge training facility to meet with the 6 officers who had been participating in the program. He wasn't sure what to expect. Would they be defensive, angry, withdrawn after seeing their colleagues arrested? Would they view the task force as a threat now rather than an opportunity? When he entered the room, he found them seated in their usual spots. But the atmosphere was different. Tense, yes, but also charged with a sense of determination that hadn't been there before. Officer Johnson spoke first. "We heard what you said at the press conference about continuing the work, expanding it. We want you to know we're still committed." The other officers nodded in agreement, their expressions solemn but resolved. One of the veterans, Sergeant Miller, who had initially been among the most skeptical, leaned forward. "What Donovan did, that's not who we are, or at least it's not who we want to be. but we need help figuring out what comes next, how we rebuild trust with the community after this." Marcus looked around the room, taking in their faces, uncertain, hopeful, searching for guidance. This was why he had created the task force in the first place, not to punish or condemn, but to support officers who wanted to serve with integrity and fairness. "That's exactly what we're going to focus on," he assured them. "Community engagement, rebuilding trust, creating systems of accountability that work for everyone, officers and civilians alike." For the next 2 hours, they engaged in the most honest conversation yet about the culture that had allowed officers like Donovan to operate unchecked, about the pressures that discouraged reporting of misconduct, about the fear some officers had that reform meant undermining their authority rather than redirecting it. As they talked, Marcus could see attitudes shifting, perspectives expanding. These officers weren't just participating in a mandatory training anymore. They were actively engaged in reimagining their roles and responsibilities. When the session ended, Johnson stayed behind, waiting until the others had left before speaking. "There's something else you should know," she said. "Officers from other units have been asking to join the task force. Not just a few, dozens. Donovan's arrest, it's like a dam broke. People who were afraid to speak up before are finding their voices." The news was unexpected but encouraging. "Why do you think that is?" Marcus asked. Johnson considered the question carefully. "Because you proved something important, that holding officers accountable doesn't mean being anti-police, that it's possible to respect the badge while still acknowledging when it's been misused." Her insight struck Marcus as profoundly important. The false dichotomy between supporting police and demanding accountability had been a major obstacle to reform. Breaking down that barrier could create space for meaningful change. That evening, as Marcus drove home, he reflected on how much had changed in the weeks since he had been handcuffed on Maple Street. What had begun as a personal humiliation had evolved into something much larger, a genuine opportunity to address long-standing issues in policing. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. An unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. "Agent Wilson," he answered. "Agent Wilson, this is Congresswoman Eleanor Hayes," came a confident female voice. "I chair the House Subcommittee on Law Enforcement Practices. I've been following what's happening in Oak Ridge with great interest." Marcus was immediately on alert. Congressional interest could be a double-edged sword. It could provide resources and visibility, but also politicize the work in ways that might undermine its effectiveness. "What can I do for you, Congresswoman?" he asked cautiously. "I'd like you to testify before our committee next month," she explained. "Share what you've learned through this task force. Help us understand what federal legislation might support similar reforms nationwide." The request was both an opportunity and a complication. Testifying would elevate the conversation to the national level, potentially influencing policy decisions that could affect departments across the country, but it would also inevitably draw political battle lines around work that needed bipartisan support to succeed. "I appreciate the invitation," Marcus replied carefully. "Let me discuss it with Director Harris and get back to you." As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus noticed a familiar figure sitting on his front porch steps, Chief Grayson, in civilian clothes rather than his uniform, a manila folder in his hands. "Chief," Marcus greeted him, curious about the unexpected visit. "Everything all right?" Grayson stood, his expression a complex mix of resignation and resolve. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since last night, about my role in all this, about the department I've been leading, about what needs to change." He handed Marcus the folder. "This is my reform plan. Comprehensive overhaul of our training, recruitment, disciplinary procedures, community engagement, everything. I want your input before I present it to the City Council next week." Marcus opened the folder, scanning the detailed proposals inside. It was thorough, thoughtful, and surprisingly progressive, not the kind of document he would have expected from Grayson when they first met. "You're serious about this," Marcus observed, looking up from the papers. "Dead serious," Grayson confirmed. "What happened with Donovan, that's on me. I created, or at least tolerated, a culture where that kind of behavior could fester. I can't change the past, but I can damn well shape the future." As they sat on the porch discussing the details of Grayson's plan, Marcus felt a cautious optimism building. The process wouldn't be easy or quick. Institutional change never was. But the foundation was being laid for something meaningful and lasting. Later, as he prepared for bed, Marcus received one final text for the day, from Reed, who had been released on his own recognizance while awaiting formal charges. "Thank you for showing me there's another way to wear the badge. Whatever happens with my case, I won't forget that." It was a small message, but it represented something profound. The possibility that even those who had been part of the problem could become part of the solution. And in that possibility lay the true promise of the work Marcus had begun. 1 month later, Marcus stood in the corridor outside the House Committee chamber, adjusting his tie as he prepared to testify. After careful consideration and discussions with Director Harris, he had accepted Congresswoman Hayes's invitation, recognizing the opportunity to influence policy at the national level. "Ready?" Diana asked, standing beside him with a briefcase containing their presentation materials. She had insisted on accompanying him to Washington, both for moral support and to help field technical questions about the task force's methodology. "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied. Public speaking had never bothered him, but the stakes today felt particularly high. This wasn't just about relaying facts or presenting evidence as he had done countless times in court proceedings. Today, he would be advocating for a fundamental reimagining of policing in America. As they entered the chamber, Marcus was struck by the formal grandeur of the setting, the raised dais where committee members sat, the cameras positioned to broadcast the proceedings, the rows of spectators and press behind him. This was a far cry from the training room in Oak Ridge where the task force had begun its work. Congresswoman Hayes, a former prosecutor with a reputation for tough but fair questioning, called the hearing to order. After introductory statements from committee members, some supportive, others skeptical, Marcus was invited to make his opening remarks. He approached the microphone with measured confidence, setting aside his prepared statement to speak from experience and conviction. "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Marcus Wilson, and I'm here today because 1 month ago, I was handcuffed outside my own home for the crime of walking while black." A murmur rippled through the chamber at his direct approach. What happened next isn't the typical story you hear in these situations. My FBI credentials were discovered. The officers realized their mistake. And that could have been the end of it. I could have filed a complaint, perhaps received an apology, and life would have gone on. Marcus paused, making eye contact with various committee members. But I chose a different path. Because the incident revealed something important, that even a federal agent with 2 decades of law enforcement experience wasn't immune to the biases that affect policing in communities of color every day. And if it could happen to me, imagine how often it happens to citizens without badges, without connections, without the platform I'm fortunate to have today. For the next 15 minutes, Marcus outlined the creation of the task force, its initial work in Oak Ridge, the resistance it encountered culminating in Donovan's arrest, and the surprising turning point that followed as officers within the department began actively engaging with reform efforts rather than resisting them. "What we've learned," he concluded, "is that meaningful change is possible when we approach reform not as an accusation, but as an opportunity. When we invite officers to be partners in the process rather than subjects of it." when we acknowledge that the vast majority of people who choose law enforcement as a profession do so with honorable intentions, even if the systems they operate within sometimes push them toward problematic behaviors. The questioning that followed was intense but largely constructive. Republicans on the committee pressed him on whether the reforms would hamper officers' ability to respond effectively to violent crime. Democrats pushed for more aggressive oversight measures. Throughout, Marcus maintained his central message that reform was not about weakening policing, but strengthening it by rebuilding trust and developing more effective approaches. "Agent Wilson," said Congressman Rollins, a former sheriff from Texas, "you've talked a lot about implicit bias training and community engagement. But let me ask you directly, do you believe America's police departments are systemically racist?" The loaded question hung in the air, a political tripwire designed to force Marcus into taking a divisive stance. He considered his answer carefully. "What I believe, Congressman, is that no institution in America exists in a vacuum. Our history of racial inequality has shaped every aspect of our society, including law enforcement. That doesn't mean that individual officers are racist, but it does mean that the systems, policies, and unwritten norms within policing can produce racially disparate outcomes even when no explicit bias is present." He leaned slightly toward the microphone, his voice steady and clear. "Our task force doesn't ask officers to wear labels or accept blame for history. It invites them to be part of creating a future where public safety is achieved equitably across all communities. In Oak Ridge, we're finding that when the conversation is framed that way, officers are eager to participate." By the end of the 3-hour hearing, Marcus had navigated the political minefield successfully, maintaining both his integrity and the practical focus of the task force's work. Several committee members from both parties expressed interest in visiting Oak Ridge to observe the program firsthand, and Congresswoman Hayes announced her intention to draft legislation that would provide federal funding for similar initiatives nationwide. Outside the chamber, as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed, Diana gave Marcus's arm a supportive squeeze. "You did it," she said with quiet pride. "You made them listen." The congressional testimony marked a pivotal expansion of the task force's influence, but Marcus knew that the most important work was still happening on the ground in Oak Ridge. While in Washington, he had received daily updates from Officer Johnson about developments in the department, some encouraging, some challenging. Upon returning to Oak Ridge the following day, Marcus went directly to the police department, where Chief Grayson had called an all-hands meeting. The atmosphere in the station was noticeably different from when Marcus had first arrived. There was tension, certainly, but also a sense of purpose and engagement that hadn't been present before. Grayson stood at the front of the briefing room, which was filled to capacity with officers from every division. He nodded to Marcus as he entered, then addressed the assembled department. "Many of you watched Agent Wilson's testimony yesterday," Grayson began. "If you didn't, I encourage you to do so. He represented not just the FBI's perspective, but also what we're trying to build here in Oak Ridge, a department that leads by example in how policing can evolve." The chief's tone was firm, but not combative, his stance one of leadership rather than defensive posturing. "Starting next week, we're implementing the first phase of our reform plan. Every officer will participate in the expanded training program, without exception. Shift schedules have been adjusted to accommodate this without reducing our coverage or responsiveness." A few disgruntled murmurs could be heard, but they were quickly silenced by supportive voices. A marked contrast to the resistance that would have dominated just weeks earlier. "I know change is difficult," Grayson acknowledged. "I know some of you have concerns about how these reforms might affect your ability to do your jobs. That's why this isn't being imposed from the top down. The task force now includes officers from every division of our department, ensuring that the practical realities of your daily work are considered in everything we implement." As the meeting concluded and officers filed out, several stopped to speak with Marcus, some to express support, others to ask questions about specific aspects of the training program. The wariness that had initially greeted him was giving way to cautious engagement even among those who had been aligned with Donovan. Officer Johnson approached, a cautiously optimistic expression on her face. "It's working," she said quietly. "Slowly, but it's working. Officers who wouldn't even make eye contact with me when I joined the task force are now asking how they can get involved." "What changed?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the shift in departmental culture. Johnson considered the question thoughtfully. Partly it was seeing Donovan's true colors, the threats, the raid attempt. That shocked a lot of people who had respected him. But mostly it's been hearing from the officers who've gone through the training. They're telling their colleagues that it's not what they feared, it's not about blame or making them feel guilty. It's practical, it's respectful of their experience, and it gives them tools they can actually use. The conversation was interrupted by a young patrol officer approaching hesitantly. "Agent Wilson, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to ask, the community engagement model you described in your testimony with the civilian advisory boards, how does that work exactly? Because I've been thinking, in my patrol area, something like that could really help with the tensions we've been having." Marcus spent the next hour in an impromptu discussion with a growing group of officers, answering questions and listening to their ideas for implementing reforms in their specific contexts. It was exactly the kind of organic engagement he had hoped for, officers taking ownership of the process rather than simply complying with directives. That evening, Marcus met with Diana and Chief Grayson at a quiet restaurant away from the station where they could speak freely about the challenges and opportunities ahead. "Donovan's preliminary hearing is scheduled for next month," Grayson informed them, his expression grim. "His attorney is pushing the dedicated officer being persecuted for doing his job narrative. It's getting some traction with certain segments of the public." "That was expected," Marcus replied. "This was never going to be a smooth process. There will always be resistance, always be those who believe that questioning any aspect of policing is an attack on all of it." "The difference is," Diana added, "now we have officers who can speak to the value of these reforms from first-hand experience. That carries weight that outside advocates never could." Grayson nodded in agreement, then shared another development. The mayor and city council had unanimously approved the budget for the reform initiatives, including community engagement programs, enhanced training, and new equipment for non-lethal interventions. "That wouldn't have happened without the national attention," he acknowledged. "Your testimony opened doors that would have remained firmly closed otherwise." As they discussed the expansion of the task force to 3 additional departments in neighboring counties, Marcus's phone buzzed with a news alert. The first federal indictments had been filed against Donovan and the officers involved in the raid attempt. The charges were serious: conspiracy against rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, and use of official authority to intimidate a federal officer. The 3 of them read the article in silence, absorbing the implications. This wasn't just about internal discipline anymore. It was about holding officers accountable under the same laws they were sworn to uphold. "It's going to get harder before it gets easier," Grayson said finally. "Donovan still has supporters in the department, in the community. This will galvanize them. Then we need to work that much harder to show that these reforms benefit everyone," Marcus replied. "Not just civilians, but officers too. Safer communities, clearer guidelines, better resources, more trust. These aren't concessions, they're improvements." Later that night, as Marcus drove home, he passed the spot where he had been handcuffed just 2 months earlier. The memory was still vivid: the cold metal around his wrists, the assumptions made based on his appearance, the stark reality that his badge and position had provided protection that ordinary citizens wouldn't have had. But now, That spot represented something different. The beginning of a journey that had already produced more change than he could have imagined that night. The task force had expanded beyond Oak Ridge. The training program was being adapted for departments nationwide, and legislation was being drafted that could provide resources for reform on a national scale. As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus noticed a small gathering on his front lawn, neighbors who had witnessed his detention that night, including Mrs. Chen, who had recorded the video. They were holding a banner that read, "Thank you for making our community safer for everyone." The simple gesture of support reminded Marcus of why this work mattered, not for recognition or advancement, but because communities deserved law enforcement that protected and served them equally, regardless of race, income, or address. As he joined his neighbors, accepting their thanks with humility, Marcus reflected on the journey ahead. The hardest parts were still to come, sustaining momentum when media attention faded, navigating the political pressures that would inevitably intensify, ensuring that reform efforts weren't diluted by compromise or resistance. But looking at the faces around him, diverse in age, race, and background, united in their desire for a more just system, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The handcuffs that had once restrained him had inadvertently unleashed something powerful, a movement for change that was growing beyond any individual or incident. And that, perhaps, was the most unexpected outcome of all, that a moment of injustice could become a catalyst for justice on a scale he had never imagined possible. 6 months had passed since that fateful night when Marcus Wilson was handcuffed on Maple Street. The seasons had changed twice, summer heat giving way to autumn crispness, then to winter's chill. But the changes in Oak Ridge ran far deeper than weather. Inside the community center auditorium, Marcus stood at the back, observing rather than participating in the scene before him. The room was filled with an unlikely mix. Police officers in uniform sitting beside community activists, city officials alongside neighborhood representatives, young people in animated conversation with veteran patrol officers. They were gathered for the first formal presentation of the Oak Ridge Police Department's Quarterly Accountability Report, a public event where crime statistics, use of force incidents, complaint resolutions, and reform progress were shared transparently with the community. It had been one of the key recommendations from the task force, initially met with resistance but now embraced as a cornerstone of rebuilding trust. Officer Johnson, recently promoted to sergeant and appointed to lead the department's newly formed Community Relations Division, was delivering the presentation with confidence and candor, neither sugarcoating challenges nor downplaying achievements. "Our traffic stop data still shows racial disparities," she acknowledged, pointing to charts projected on the screen behind her. "But you can see the trend is moving in the right direction as our new protocols take effect. We're not where we need to be yet, but we're making measurable progress." The audience listened attentively, some taking notes, others nodding in recognition. What struck Marcus most was the atmosphere, not the tension-filled confrontations that had characterized earlier community meetings, but a collaborative focus on shared goals. Chief Grayson, seated in the front row, occasionally added context to Johnson's presentation, but mostly allowed her to take the lead. A deliberate choice that symbolized the department's evolution toward more inclusive leadership. As the presentation concluded and the floor opened for questions, Marcus slipped quietly out of the auditorium, heading for his next appointment. He had intentionally maintained a more distant role in recent months, gradually stepping back to ensure that the reforms took root organically rather than remaining dependent on his presence or authority. His destination was the federal courthouse downtown, where Donovan's trial was entering its final phase. The case had proceeded more slowly than expected, with multiple procedural delays and attempts by the defense to suppress key evidence. But finally, after months of legal maneuvering, closing arguments were scheduled for today. Marcus entered the courtroom discreetly, taking a seat in the back row as Donovan's defense attorney was concluding his final appeal to the jury. Officer Donovan served this community faithfully for 20 years, the lawyer was saying, his tone earnest and imploring. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, his actions that night crossed a line. But I ask you to consider the context. A dedicated officer watching changes imposed from outside, feeling his years of experience dismissed, his methods questioned, his very identity as a police officer under attack. The attorney gestured toward Marcus, having noticed his entrance. Agent Wilson came to Oak Ridge with good intentions, perhaps. But the pressure he created, the scrutiny he imposed, these pushed a good officer to a breaking point. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it helps explain it. Marcus kept his expression neutral, unsurprised by the strategy. The defense had consistently tried to position Donovan as a victim of circumstance rather than an aggressor who had organized an armed operation against a federal agent. When the prosecution rose for their closing argument, the approach was starkly different. Methodical, evidence-focused, and unflinching in its assessment of Donovan's actions. This case isn't about resistance to change or protecting traditional policing, the prosecutor stated firmly. It's about abuse of power in its most basic form. Officer Donovan used his position, his authority, and department resources to target someone who challenged his worldview. He organized other officers, acquired tactical equipment through deception, and planned an armed operation against a federal agent's home. The prosecutor turned to face the jury directly. If we excuse this because Donovan felt threatened by reform, where do we draw the line? What other abuses of power become acceptable when an officer feels their methods questioned? The badge is granted as a public trust. Officer Donovan betrayed that trust, not just with Agent Wilson, but with every citizen he swore to protect and serve. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, Marcus exited the courthouse. His presence noted, but his thoughts kept private. The outcome of Donovan's trial mattered, certainly, but it was just one piece of the larger transformation taking place in Oak Ridge and beyond. His phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Senate committee just approved the Police Accountability and Community Trust Act. Full vote scheduled for next month. We did it. The legislation, inspired in part by Marcus's congressional testimony, would provide federal funding for reform initiatives similar to the Oak Ridge Task Force, along with enhanced oversight mechanisms and resources for departments committed to implementing evidence-based changes. It had navigated the treacherous waters of partisan politics by focusing on practical improvements rather than ideological positions, garnering support from both progressive reformers and law enforcement advocates. Marcus smiled as he texted back, "We're just getting started." His next stop was the FBI field office, where Director Harris was waiting to discuss the expansion of the task force model. What had begun with one department in Oak Ridge had grown to include 12 departments across 4 states, with a waiting list of agencies requesting to participate. The preliminary data from the first wave is extremely promising, Harris said as they reviewed the reports. Use of force incidents down 26%, community complaints reduced by 31%, and officer job satisfaction actually increasing rather than decreasing as critics predicted. Marcus nodded, pleased but not surprised. When officers have clearer guidelines, better training, and more community support, they can do their jobs more effectively and with less stress. It was never about making policing weaker. It was about making it stronger through accountability and trust. The Bureau wants to formalize this, Harris continued. Create a permanent division focused on police reform consulting, with you at the helm. National scope, significant resources, direct line to the director. It was a remarkable opportunity, a chance to institutionalize the work Marcus had started, to ensure it continued regardless of political shifts or changing priorities. Yet he found himself hesitating. aware that something important would be lost in the transition from grassroots initiative to federal program. "I need to think about it," he told Harris honestly. "The success we've had came partly from working alongside departments as partners, not overseeing them as federal authorities. I'm not sure that dynamic can be maintained in a formalized structure." Harris seemed to have anticipated this concern. "That's exactly why we need you leading it. Keep the collaborative approach, the focus on practical improvements rather than bureaucratic compliance, but with the backing and resources only the Bureau can provide." As Marcus drove home that evening, his mind was filled with the weight of the decision before him. The career opportunity was undeniable, but so was the risk of losing the authentic connection that had made the task force effective. He was still pondering these questions when he turned onto Maple Street and saw an unexpected scene unfolding near his house. Officer Reed, in civilian clothes, talking with Mrs. Chen and several other neighbors. They were gathered around a table set up on the sidewalk, clipboards and papers spread out before them. Marcus parked and approached curiously. Reed looked up, a brief flash of discomfort crossing his face before he straightened his shoulders and extended his hand. "Agent Wilson." He greeted him with newfound confidence. "I was just explaining the new Neighborhood Safety Council to your neighbors, part of my community service requirement." Reed had pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for his cooperation in the case against Donovan and the others. His sentence had included probation and community service rather than jail time, a decision Marcus had supported, recognizing the officer's genuine remorse and willingness to make amends. "It's more than just fulfilling hours," Reed continued, his tone sincere. "I'm actually starting to see things differently. Working with the community directly, listening to their concerns instead of just responding to calls, it changes your perspective." Mrs. Chen nodded in agreement. "Officer Reed has been very helpful. He's teaching us how to organize neighborhood watches that actually work with police instead of just reporting to them." As Marcus observed the interaction, he was struck by the unexpected resonance of the scene. Reed, who had once helped handcuff him on this very street, now working to build bridges between police and the community he had misjudged. Later that evening, as Marcus sat on his porch reflecting on the day's events, his phone rang. Chief Grayson, calling with news from the courthouse. "The jury came back with a verdict," Grayson said without preamble. "Donovan was found guilty on all counts. Sentencing in 30 days, but with the federal charges, he's looking at a minimum of 15 years. Marcus absorbed this information silently. There was no satisfaction in seeing Donovan's career and freedom destroyed, only a somber recognition that accountability was necessary for healing to begin. "How's the department taking it?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Grayson replied. "The evidence was too clear to ignore, and honestly, most officers are ready to move forward. Donovan's actions cast a shadow over everyone with a badge. Having this resolved allows us to focus on rebuilding rather than defending." After they hung up, Marcus remained on the porch as darkness fell, the streetlights casting familiar patterns across Maple Street. So much had changed since that night, when flashing police lights had interrupted his walk home, not just in Oak Ridge, but across the country as their work became a model for departments nationwide. The next morning, Marcus called Director Harris with his decision. He would accept the position leading the Bureau's new reform initiative, but with conditions. The work would remain field-based rather than centralized in Washington. Local departments would be true partners rather than subjects, and the focus would stay firmly on practical improvements rather than political victories. Harris agreed without hesitation, having expected nothing less from the agent who had transformed a personal injustice into a movement for systemic change. 1 week later, Marcus stood at a podium in the Oak Ridge City Hall preparing to announce the next phase of their work. Behind him sat Chief Grayson, Sergeant Johnson, Director Harris, Congresswoman Hayes, and representatives from police departments and community organizations across the region. The room was filled with media, officials, and citizens, all gathered to hear about a new approach to policing that had begun with a single incident on a quiet suburban street. As Marcus looked out at the assembled crowd, he was struck by the improbable journey that had brought them all together. The handcuffs that had been placed on his wrists 6 months ago had been meant to restrain him, to reinforce a power dynamic as old as policing itself. Instead, they had become the catalyst for breaking chains of a different kind: the institutional inertia, reflexive defensiveness, and resistance to accountability that had long prevented meaningful reform. 6 months ago, I was handcuffed outside my home because I matched a vague description, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. Today, we gathered to announce a nationwide initiative that grew from that moment, not because of what made it exceptional, but because of what made it common. He gestured to the diverse group seated behind him. What you see here is proof that we can move beyond the false choice between supporting police and demanding accountability. We can do both. We must do both, because public safety depends on public trust, and trust is built through transparency, accountability, and equal treatment under the law. As he continued outlining the expanded initiative, the training programs, the community engagement models, the accountability mechanisms that would be implemented across participating departments, Marcus felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about reforming procedures or changing policies. It was about reimagining the relationship between those who enforce the law and those it is meant to protect. The handcuffs that once restricted me have instead unleashed something powerful, he concluded. A recognition that we can do better, that we must do better, and that when we work together, officers and citizens, leaders and community members, we can build a system of justice that truly lives up to its name. Outside City Hall, as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed, Marcus stood with Chief Grayson and Sergeant Johnson, 3 individuals who had begun as adversaries but had become partners in a mission larger than any of them. "Never thought we'd end up here," Grayson commented quietly, surveying the media frenzy. "When I got that call about you being detained, I was just hoping to contain the PR damage." Marcus smiled, recognizing how far they had all come. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a misstep. As they walked down the steps together, Marcus caught sight of a patrol car parked nearby, not with lights flashing in pursuit or detention, but simply present, part of the community rather than imposed upon it. The officer inside gave a respectful nod as they passed, a simple gesture that symbolized the evolution taking place. The handcuffs were gone, but their impact remained, transformed from an instrument of control into a catalyst for change that would continue to resonate through Oak Ridge and beyond, one department, one community, one interaction at a time.